The series begins in 2009 at a hospital, specifically in the intensive care unit with Dr. Erdogan, who informs his family that his nephew Kamal has entered a coma. Everyone is shocked and very saddened by the news. We go back in time by one day. At that time, Kamal is preparing a video camera to record his son Karam's birthday. Rayhan, his wife, enters the room, takes the camera from him to record. She speaks into the video for her son to watch when he grows up, capturing the entire family gathered for the celebration. Fidat, Kamal's business partner and close friend, takes the camera from her and starts filming the birthday party as it begins. Later that night, Kamal sleeps on the couch next to his son, Karam, and Rayhan joins them, also falling asleep there. Later, Kamal wakes up disturbed and tells Rayhan that he will go to his company because he forgot his laptop there. When he arrives at the company, only the security staff is present. He enters his office and sits down. At the same time, Turan, Kamal's brother, is outside the company in his car. He covers his face, gets out of the car with gasoline, and drenches the factory with it. He then receives a call from an unknown person. We understand that he is setting the factory on fire to claim the insurance money because he has debts he cannot pay. While Turan cuts the power and sets the company on fire, Kamal is trapped in the elevator due to the power outage. Suddenly, he hears the fire alarm and tries to break the elevator door, but finds smoke seeping into the elevator. Unable to breathe, suffocates. Rayhan receives a call from the police, informing her that the factory has burned down and Kamal was inside. She is utterly devastated, screaming and crying. When Turan receives the news, he is also shocked because he did not know his brother was in the factory. He believed the factory was empty and no one was there. He collapses, overwhelmed by guilt for being responsible for what happened to his brother. 10 years later, we see Rayhan visiting Kamal in the hospital. We learn that she has continued to visit him every day for 10 years because Kamal was not just her husband, but her first and last love. She talks to him, telling him how much she misses him, wishes to hear his voice again. She holds his hand, hugs it, whispers in his ear, asking him to wake up and come back to her. She then takes the pillowcase Kamal was lying on home to keep smelling his scent and feel as if Kamal is still sleeping next to her. The next day, Nurse Asiya arrives at the hospital. We learn that she has been caring for Kamal for 10 years, as if he were awake, feeling and hearing her. She takes him out into the sun, plays movies for him, and even puts headphones on him to let him listen to music. At night, she watches a movie next to Kamal, discussing the film with him as if he could hear her. When her shift ends, she returns home. We learn that she is married and has a young daughter named Aylul, and one day, while in the hospital, she notices that he starts to move and begins to respond to the treatment. This means that he might soon awaken from his coma. At that moment, he hears her voice and feels her presence, so she quickly runs to the head physician to inform him of what happened. He goes with her to examine him and to determine if he is truly improving or not. He tells her to prepare him as they need to conduct tests and examinations. He asks her to also take care of her young daughter instead of being so focused on the patient. He appears upset with her. She is surprised by his reaction. Later, another person arrives at the hospital and sits with the head physician, who shows him the results of the scans and tests they have conducted. It is revealed that there's a possibility he might awaken from the coma at any time since his body and brain are responding well to the treatment. This shocks it. It's apparent that he is distressed, doesn't want him to wake up from the coma. He tells the doctor that he is not ready for him to re-enter his life, as many things have changed over the past 10 years. He's not willing to dismantle everything he has built and achieved for his sake. He asks the doctor to keep him in the coma and not to let him wake up. However, the doctor initially refuses, but eventually agrees as he is threatened, and they share some secrets and underhanded dealings. During this time, she sits next to him, crying and deeply saddened. Afterwards, she goes to the bathroom, burdened with the thought of meeting him, looking into his eyes when he awakens. She decides that she must leave the hospital. Later, before leaving the hospital, he goes to his room, sits beside him, and talks to him. He asks him not to wake up and not to return because their life together now would be difficult. He lets him know that everyone considered him dead. From his words, it is understood that none of his family visits him, and no one knows about the visits from Rayhan. He tells him before leaving that he wishes he would die because his return to life would cause the death of everyone. At that time, the head physician signs a prescription for a new medication for him, intended to keep him in the coma and prevent him from waking up. He hands the prescription to Nurse Jokan, who begins administering the medication to him. Meanwhile, she is in her room packing her things. Afterwards, she sees him leaving his room and is very surprised, as none of his family or acquaintances have visited him for years. Considering him dead, she enters and talks to him, informing him that soon all his acquaintances and relatives will reappear. At that moment, Jokan enters with the medication. She is very surprised that they want to give him this medication because if he takes it, he will remain in the coma and not wake up. So he informs her that these are the head physician's orders. She replies to him, saying that she will take the medication from him and administer it to him herself. He hands her the medication and leaves. At that moment, She throws the medication in the trash and approaches him, telling him that she will protect him from the conspiracy being plotted against him, will not allow anyone, no matter who they are, to harm or get close to him. Later, he calls another person, asking him to go to the company immediately. When he arrives at the company, he is shocked by what he learns from him, that he might wake up from the coma at any moment. He asks him how he could wake up without suffering from memory loss, and how he could move and walk after having been bedridden for 10 years. He explains to him that another person had been providing him with daily physical therapy so that if he woke up and moved, the physical therapy would be easier and wouldn't take as much time. All the doctors who examined him said that a very small percentage of those who wake up from comas suffer from memory loss. This makes him even more distraught, as he doesn't know how he will face his brother with what has happened. He considers fleeing and leaving the country because he believes that his brother will never forgive or pardon him. The news of their mother's death would destroy him if he finds out. He tries to calm him down, reminding him that all the doctors said that he was considered dead and that they shouldn't be held accountable for anything now that he has awakened, because they are not at fault for anything. He's shocked by this statement and tells him that his brother might kill him because of it. Later, he dreams that he is sitting with Rayhan and his son Karam, but suddenly they disappear. He continues searching for them fearfully and then sees his mother appear, telling him that Rayhan and Karam are no longer in his life. At that very moment, he wakes up and comes out of the coma with her by his side. She then calls the wife of another person to inform her that he has finally woken up. The wife is shocked with joy and informs her husband of what she learned. Unfortunately, her husband suffers from Alzheimer's and speaks in a confused and disorganized manner. However, she manages to understand from his words that there is a blue file in the hospital archives containing the necessary treatment for him. Afterwards, the wife goes to the hospital and meets her. She informs her that she hasn't told anyone that he has woken up. The wife is surprised and asks her why. She then tells her about what happened, including the surprise visit, and that afterwards the head physician ordered medication to be administered to keep him in a coma and prevent him from waking up. The wife then understands what is happening and asks her not to tell anyone else that he has woken up. She asks her to go to the archives and retrieve her husband's blue file. Afterward, she enters his room to see him and make sure he is okay, but he is still not fully comprehending what is happening. At that time, she is in the archives, finding the blue file, opening it, and reading what's written inside. It contains a protocol written by another person on treating individuals who have awakened from comas after years. She returns to her and tells her that she found the file, which contains a protocol for treating patients who have been in a coma and how to handle them after they awaken. She asks her to implement everything in the file on him, and to do so without letting anyone know that she is doing it. The next morning, she goes to visit her friend, who is shocked to learn that he has awakened. Her friend then advises her to stay away from him. Suddenly, her husband arrives and scolds her because their daughter has returned from school and is waiting for her. She bids her friend goodbye and leaves with her husband. Later, she is back at the hospital, beginning to implement the treatment protocol on him. His body responds to the treatment, which greatly pleases her. Soon, his memory starts to become fuzzy. The events he remembers are jumbled. He begins to experience severe headaches. In the evening, another friend goes to a restaurant to meet with his friend. As soon as he sees a third person at the same restaurant, he becomes very agitated and loses his composure. It is known then that he is one of his closest friends, has been depressed and saddened since the incident with him. His friend tries to calm him down to prevent him from confronting the third person as usual. However, he insists on approaching him and speaks with him. He pulls up a chair and sits in front of him, calling him a despicable man. At that moment, his friend tries again to calm him down as they are about to fight. He separates them and asks the third person to leave the place. Third person feels compelled to leave to avoid any further confrontation with him. Afterward, she is sitting with him and feeding him. At that time, he asks her to bring him a mirror because he wants to see himself. She reluctantly gives him the mirror because he has aged 10 years and is still unaware of how much time has passed while he was in the coma. When he sees his appearance and the white hair on his head, is shocked. He asks her about another person, why she hasn't come to visit him. She becomes tense at that moment, unsure of how to respond to him. She takes the food tray and stands up. At that very moment, he sees the current year on the calendar. He's even more shocked, collapses. He tries to get up from the bed but falls to the floor. She rushes to help him. He asks her how 10 years have passed and what has happened to his wife and son. She then calls another person to tell her what happened, that they can no longer hide the situation from him, as he has begun to focus and ask questions. He was shocked when he learned that they are in 2019, not 2009. She asks her to prepare and to prepare him as well, because she will take him to the lake house and tell him everything herself. And then he asks her to help help him shave his beard. She brings him the razor and the mirror, visibly scared that he might hurt himself. However, he reassures her that he is fine, can shave by himself. Later, a character arrives at the hospital to visit him. He's surprised to find him awake, rushes to him, and hugs him joyfully, tears of happiness streaming down his face. However, his memory is fuzzy, doesn't quite remember his visitor. All he wants is to see his son and his wife. Overwhelmed, he speaks while trying to hold back his tears. The visitor tries to calm him down, reassuring him that he will take him to his wife and son. After a while, she returns to take him out so they can meet someone else. However, she is shocked to find that he is not in his room and learns that he has already left with his visitor. She calls someone immediately to inform her of the situation, leaving her shocked. She tries to contact the visitor, but he does not respond. The visitor and he then reach the house where another character lives. When she sees him standing in front of her, she is stunned and incredulous, hardly believing he is awake and in front of her now, thinking she might be dreaming. But he assures her that he is real and awake. She approaches him, caresses his face, and embraces him, collapsing in tears. At that moment, he is shocked when he sees pictures of her and their son with someone else. We then understand why she was visiting him secretly, and the reason why the visitor despises this other man, considering him an enemy. He looks at her and asks how she could do this and marry his lifelong friend whom he considered a brother. Just then, that man arrives and tries to calm him down, but he attacks him. At that time, a child is very scared and runs to the man, crying and begging him to get rid of the bad man who is attacking. In that moment, he is struck with a huge shock and remains silent, unable to speak. The visitor takes him out of the house. By then, another character has arrived, helping the visitor support him. They take him to the house where he lived with his wife and son. There, he asks the visitor and the other character to leave him alone in the house. They comply with his request, given his difficult emotional state and his inability to speak. Once inside the house, he wanders around, devastated, remembering all the memories in the house with his wife and son, unable to comprehend or believe that his wife, the love of his life, married his dearest friend. At the same time, she is devastated by what has happened, does not know how she will act or what she will do. During this time, two characters are sitting together when another character, the daughter of one of them, arrives and learns what has happened. She becomes very worried about her, so she decides to go to her to make sure she is all right. He finds her sitting amidst pictures of herself, her husband, and their son, and the lemons she picks as soon as they come off the lemon tree they planted together. She is devastated and crying, telling her that she feared this day would come, despite her daily prayers for her husband's return. However, his looks at her today were harsh and hard to forget. Her heart aches for her son, who didn't know his father, and for her husband, hurt and confused. She feels immense guilt, but the visitor comforts her, reminding her that she is a victim and is not to blame for anything that happened. She reassures her that she has witnessed all the pain and suffering she endured over the years, that everything in the world has a solution. However, she feels that nothing can be solved, that her husband will never forgive her for what happened. She doesn't know how she'll be able to look him in the eyes again. So the visitor embraces her, comforting her as she is extremely distressed. At the same time, a character goes to her husband's house after learning what has happened. He hugs him while crying and apologizes for not visiting him, tells him about how much he has suffered from being away from him. The next day, she gets dressed and ready and goes into her son's room to wake him up for school. She then goes to the kitchen to prepare his breakfast. Afterward, they wait for the bus to arrive. During this time, her son talks to her, telling her that his father reassured him and explained who the man was that they had an argument with the day before, saying he is a business partner, that they have some disagreements. But he didn't understand why this had made her cry and distraught. She remains silent, unsure of what to say. When the school bus arrives, her son boards it and leaves. She then angrily speaks to her husband, telling him that she understood from his lack of surprise when he learned her other husband had woken up, that he knew he would wake up and had kept it from her, which is why he had been pressing them to travel. He responds, telling her that he is not ready to lose the family he has built, that he was scared for her and their son. She, however, is not convinced by his words. At the same time, another character is with someone else, telling him that her task, as he had requested from her, is over, that she must leave now, but she doesn't know what to do with the secret he left her with. We then understand that he was the one who asked her to take care of her husband in the hospital and look after him until he woke up. And then, as she is leaving the house, she encounters another woman who has just arrived. She talks to her and asks why she kept it a secret that her husband had woken up. She explains that no one was supposed to know this was going to happen because there was a conspiracy in the hospital to keep her husband in a coma. The woman thanks her for taking care of her husband during this time. Afterwards, the woman goes to another character's house, who greets her coldly at the door and informs her that her husband is at his own house and not with them. This upsets her because She doesn't want her husband to be alone in the house without care. She asks the other character to try to convince him to stay with her and her uncle, but the character shuts the door in her face without responding. At the same time, her husband stands in front of the lemon tree that he planted with her, looking at it sadly as he remembers the day they planted it together. Meanwhile, the woman has reached her husband's house, accompanied by her young daughter. She leaves her daughter and goes to the garden where her husband sees her. He plays with the little girl and asks her who her father and mother are, in case she is lost. She tells him her name is Batul, that her parents are the woman and another man. This shocks her husband even more. He remains sitting alone, saddened. Suddenly, the woman comes to him. He tells her that he saw her daughter with another man and is in shock, unable to comprehend everything that is happening. He tells her that she surely cannot be his wife and the woman he knew and married, and she must be someone else. He continues, expressing disbelief that his son calls another man dad. She asks him to listen to her and let her explain, but he tells her that he can't see her as the woman he once knew anymore. He relates a dream in which his mother came to him and told him that she and his son had left his life, a conversation he didn't understand at the time. He blames her for his son calling someone else Dad. His words hurt her deeply. She pleads with him to understand and have mercy on her. He asks how she could choose to marry another man on the day she chose to marry, especially his friend and brother. He tells him that she did what any mother in her place would have done, because her son needed a father and support. However, he ignores any words she says, asks her to leave his house as he doesn't want to see her. He tells her that he will tell their son the whole truth, that he is his real father. She tries to stop him because it would hurt their son and shock him, as he has lived for 10 years with another man. I think he is his father. He insists on his decision and asks her again to leave and never come back to his house because she has destroyed their home, their love, and their family. Shocked by his words, she leaves, devastated and saddened. At the same time, she is at another man's house, arguing with him about everything that happened 10 years ago, accusing him of betrayal of their bread and salt, and his friendship with her husband. She tells him that her husband always referred to him as a brother and asks him to leave, insisting that her husband's wife and son return to their real home because her husband lost years lying in bed. She argues that now he has the right to live the remainder of his life with his son and wife, not to mention the house and company he took possession of by force. The man mocks her words, telling her that the house and company are his because he was the one who maintained and grew them. He refuses to let her and her son go to anyone because he has lived with and raised the son for 10 years by himself. He warns her to not speak to him disrespectfully again, as he is only holding back because of her age, but he might lose his patience and upset her if she continues. She leaves him and walks away. Afterwards, he sits with the woman and asks her what she discussed with her husband. She reveals that her husband now hates her because of him. He responds, stating that what her husband experienced was very difficult, but not anyone's fault to blame because it's natural for people to move on in life, create a family, and protect it. Angrily, she asks him to leave her alone, stating that someday her son will inevitably find out who his real father is. The man assures her that he will protect the son from her husband, as now is not the right time for him to reappear. He warns her to think before acting. At that very moment, the son goes to the house, which now belongs to the man like the company. He finds her husband there, and unlike before, he is not afraid and speaks with him. The son tells him his name, and her husband feels a little happy that the son is talking to him without fear. The son asks if he was fighting with his father, and just then, the man arrives. He is very upset to see his son talking to her husband and quickly takes him away to talk privately, warning him not to come near the son or say anything to him. However, her husband asserts that the boy is his son and he will treat him however he wishes. After that, the man sits with the son and tells him that he should not go to that house again. The son asks why and if the man named her husband is a bad person. The man tells him that her husband might harm him and he must stay away from him, asking for his promise to listen to him. The son promises him. At the same moment, the woman overhears the entire conversation between the man and her son, becoming very distressed. She remembers how the man helped her when her son was sick and young, acting like a father to him, standing by them through every significant moment of their lives until the son got used to his presence and started calling him dad. At the same time, she is with a paper and burns it. Then her husband argues with her for quitting her job suddenly without consulting him, especially since they really need the money from her job. She asks him to lower his voice because their daughter has just returned from school. Meanwhile, another man is in his car with the driver, leaving his house when they are surprised to see a man standing in the middle of the road. The man in the car then tells the driver to speed up to scare the man standing in the road. However, the man in the road stands firm, unafraid and unmoved, forcing the driver to stop the car. The man in the car gets out to talk to him, but the man in the road attacks him, fighting because he's trying to keep his son away from him. At the same time, another character arrives with a gun, threatening the driver because he wants to shoot the man in the road. His character wants to kill the man from the car and get rid of him. The man in the road stops him. After that, the character with the gun sits down with the man from the road and asks him why he stopped him from killing the other man and getting rid of him. He is told that the time hasn't come yet and that the 10 years must be paid for dearly. He asks the armed man to leave so he can rest and sleep, thanking him for standing by his side during that time. As soon as the armed man leaves, the man from the road collapses from anger, breaks a water glass he was holding. Then he sits reminiscing about old memories, the days he used to sit with his wife and the other man. At that time, another woman comes to sit with him and check on him. He asks her about the marriage of his wife and the other man, how it happened, and where his mother was at that time. She tells him that they got married 3 years after what happened to him, that she doesn't know anything about the reason for their marriage, that his mother died before all this happened. He then asks how he was able to wake up from a coma after 10 years in good health, able to move. She tells him about a woman whose uncle made her his personal nurse. She took care of him alone, consistently providing physical therapy sessions, which is why when he woke up, his body wasn't significantly affected, and she prevented the other man from harming him in the hospital. He's surprised why a nurse would dedicate her life for him, suspecting there must be a secret behind it, and wants to know where she is so he can speak with her. At the hospital, the head of the doctors is surprised to find the man from the car in his office, sitting in his chair. The man is very upset with him because he did not fulfill their agreement to keep the other man in a coma. The head doctor explains that the nurse is the reason because she took the medication and threw it in the trash to let the man wake up. The man from the car is surprised and asks why the nurse would do such a thing, but the head doctor doesn't have an answer. When he asks to meet the nurse, he is shocked to learn that she has resigned and left. He gets angry at the head doctor and threatens him, saying that if the secret between them is revealed, he will fall with him. At the same time, he manages to get to her house, and she is very surprised when she finds him knocking on her door. He sits with her husband for a while until she prepares coffee for them, then tries to tempt her husband with money and asks him to let him speak with her alone because he needs her for an important matter. When he sits with her, he tells her that he knows she knows his secret and that surely her former patient will look for her to thank her for the 10 years she spent by his side. She tells him that she has a home and a family and is not interested in getting involved in such matters. At that moment, her daughter enters the room. He tells her and her husband that he will give them money, take care of their expenses, because he has decided to have his company help them. She then realizes that he will not leave her alone. She becomes very afraid for her daughter at that time. Meanwhile, he is in the bathroom washing his face, but his memories with his wife are still affecting him. At the same time, another man is sitting with the wife, talking about wanting to rid himself of his guilt and wanting to tell everything that happened to her husband. However, the debt he owes to the other man prevents it. If he gets close to his brother, the other man will humiliate him. He asks her to help him so that the other man will let him be by his brother's side. She agrees because she does not want her husband to be alone without someone by his side, despite her frustration that no one thinks to tell her husband about the suffering she endured. Meanwhile, her husband calls another man and asks him to look for the nurse who took care of him. Afterwards, the other man is sitting in his company with a businessman named Ibrahim. Ibrahim is worried about his return, fearing he might become a competitor in the market again. However, the other man reassures him, telling him that her husband's brother is under his control. He asks him to calm down, as he will sort everything out. At that time, the brother arrives and greets Ibrahim. When Ibrahim leaves, the brother talks to the other man about his relationship with his brother, stating that he must be by his side and with him because he is not mentally at ease. The other man laughs mockingly, sure that he had been with the wife before coming to. The brother is surprised how the other man knew something like that. Then the other man threatens him with the debts he owes and that the people he owes are asking about him every day. The brother replies that if he means Hiram, he will speak to him himself. He decides then to be by his brother's side and not to be afraid of the other man's threats. He leaves him and walks away. At that time, the other man calls one of his men and orders him to monitor the brother's house moment by moment and to inform him about every person who enters and exits his place. Meanwhile, she is with her friend, telling her about what he said to her, including his threats about the secret she knows. Her friend is shocked and tells her that if the secret comes out, the situation won't be easy for her. She advises her to stay away from them all, especially him, because she won't be able to keep the secret, will end up telling him, putting herself in trouble. She wonders why her friend is so sure she will slip up in front of him. Her friend laughs, understanding her well, knowing how attached she is to him. It is then revealed that her friend had a relationship with his uncle and had long waited for him to divorce his wife and return to her. She informs her that his uncle is currently suffering from Alzheimer's and doesn't remember anything. At that time, he goes to another woman to ask her for some money because he wants to go out but doesn't have any money. She tells him that he can't go out alone and asks him to come inside and wait while she gets him the money. Then he sits with his uncle, who doesn't recognize or know him due to Alzheimer's. However, his uncle continues to speak, week, saying many incomprehensible things, including that he is the reason for his wife's sadness and what happened to her, and calling another man a devil and evil. The woman then tells him that his uncle always says many things like this that don't make sense, surely hiding a secret that he can't forget, which is now affecting him due to his illness. Meanwhile, another man is at a car showroom, and the owner of the showroom is a longtime friend. When he sees his expression and gaze, he realizes that he is contemplating something bad. Shortly after, another character calls a woman named Mariam, who is known to be the girlfriend of Hiram. He wants to meet her, and she tells him that she will try to meet him without anyone noticing or seeing her. That very moment, Hiram is uncomfortable with Mariam and suspicious of her. A little later, the factory security informs another character that his brother has come, which surprises him. Meanwhile, his brother is standing in front of the factory, recalling the fire incident and what happened to him. He snaps out of his memories to the voice of Mohammed, the factory guard, who is very happy to see him again after all these years. He learns from him that the factory land is up for sale and tells him that just as they stole his company, they will destroy the factory and sell the land. At that time, another character arrives and sits with him. He asks him why the factory land is up for sale, why no one repaired it after the fire, and how easy it was for him to part with the place their father built from scratch and worked so hard on. The other character responds, telling him that another man decided to sell the factory land after taking over everything. He reassures him that he is with him and on his side. If he refuses to sell the factory land, he will also refuse because all he wants now is to see a smile return to his face like old times. He then bids farewell to his brother and leaves. At the same moment, he receives a phone call from his friend informing him that the nurse he's been looking for has left the hospital and resigned. He's very surprised at this news. At the same time, when she returns to her home, her children welcome her. Then her son tells her that his father told him to stay away from him because he is a bad person and would hurt him. She becomes very upset and decides to tell her son not to listen to his father's words and to judge him for himself, assuring him that he is a good person who would love him if he got to know him and that it is impossible for him to harm him. Meanwhile, another character calls the businessman to inform him that he does not intend to let him sell the factory rooms. This annoys the businessman, who then ends the call abruptly. At that time, he goes to the hospital where his uncle was treated and inquires about the nurse to find out why she left her job. A colleague of hers tells him she doesn't know and was surprised when she suddenly left. He asks the nurse for her address and she writes it down for him, warning him not to tell anyone that she gave him the address because it is forbidden. She knows that he surely wants to thank the nurse for supporting him for 10 years. He then goes to the nurse's address with his friend, who waits in the car. He knocks on the door. She is shocked to see him standing there, but welcomes him in. When he sees her daughter, he treats her kindly and gently. After that, the nurse asks her daughter to go play in her room. He talks with the nurse and wants to know what she is hiding from him. Feeling that there is something she knows and is hesitant or afraid to say, he tells her that he is sure that her caring for him for 10 years had a reason behind it. The nurse becomes tense and evades answering, denying knowing anything. He doesn't believe her and tells her that his uncle was very smart, wouldn't have chosen her specifically to take care of him without a reason. She tells him that his uncle trusted her on a professional level. That must be the reason. He then offers her a job to take care of him at home, as he is alone and needs someone to look after him, and no one else would understand his condition as well as she would. However, she refuses because she sees that his health is good, does not need any care. At that moment, her husband arrives and greets him. Knowing him and aware that the nurse had been caring for him, he repeats the topic of his care in front of her husband and mentions that the nurse refused his offer. Her husband is surprised because he had just talked with the nurse about her needing to return to work. He tells him that he will talk with her and try to convince her. When he leaves, the husband argues with the nurse because of her refusal of his offer. The same moment, he receives a phone. At that time, he is in the car with his friend, telling him about the conversation he had with the nurse. He mentions that she won't agree to work with him, even if her husband pressures her, because it's very clear that she knows a secret or something she is hiding and is afraid that he in particular will find out. This was evident from how she behaved and spoke with him. Meanwhile, the husband tries again with the nurse, urging her to accept the job offer from him because he's not working right now and they need the money. She shouldn't turn down such an opportunity. The nurse is very distressed by this pressure and quarrels with her husband, then retreats to the bathroom where she breaks down and cries. At this time, another woman goes to visit her husband's uncle at his home after learning that her friends are not currently with him, to speak with him privately without anyone overhearing them. As soon as the uncle sees her, he apologizes for being the reason for the suffering she has endured and continues to endure. However, she also apologizes to him, telling him him that her husband has woken up and come back to life, but he believes that she betrayed him and married his friend. She explains that no one knows the truth except for him and the other man. She doesn't know how to tell her husband that if it weren't for the other man, he wouldn't have a son. She then recalls the past when her husband was in a coma and their son fell ill with a rare autoimmune disease, worsening every day. The uncle had only one solution, which was that there needed to be a brother for their son to take tissue from to save him. She was perplexed and didn't understand how she could conceive with her husband while he was in a coma, so the uncle explained that he would inseminate her with her husband's sperm so they could save their son. She agreed. The nurse heard everything at that time. Unfortunately, all attempts failed. She couldn't conceive with her husband in that way. Due to her extreme distress, as her son was dying, the other man spoke to her alone, suggested that they marry and have a child to save their son. She was shocked by his request, feeling lost and unsure of how to think because the situation was very difficult. She didn't know how else she could save her son if she didn't conceive another child. She felt forced to agree in order to save her son from death. The other man and she agreed that if her husband ever woke up, she should never know what had happened. This secret would be buried with her in her grave. When she snaps out of her memories, she tells the uncle that if the secret is revealed, the other man will take her daughter from her. The uncle responds, telling her that he has written everything down in a notebook for her husband to know the truth when he wakes up. Suddenly, the uncle has a heart attack. At that moment, she quickly calls her friend to inform him that the uncle had a heart attack. At the same time, another character finds a woman named Mariam murdered and hanged at the factory gate. The businessman arrives and tries to calm him down, offering condolences and telling him that he can help him, but only if he agrees to be on his side and follow his instructions. Then, an ambulance arrives at the uncle's house and takes him away, with everyone worried about his condition. Meanwhile, the businessman recalls his agreement with the chief doctor to tell the uncle and the woman that all attempts to impregnate her with her husband's sperm had failed, leaving her no choice but to marry him. It is then revealed that all this was orchestrated by the businessman to marry the woman and take her away from his lifelong friend. At that time, the nurse is sitting with her daughter, who tells her that the uncle who visited them that day is very kind and nice, and she wants him to visit them again because she liked him very much. This makes the nurse tense. She recalls her pregnancy from him and the surprise that she was actually pregnant by him, meaning her daughter is actually his daughter. The next day, the woman meets the nurse and asks her to take care of him and not to leave him alone because he needs someone by his side, especially since he lives alone and might suddenly become ill and find no one to help him. However, the nurse is tense during this conversation, visibly uncomfortable and scared. At that time, he's sitting with his son, talking to him. When he learns from his son that the businessman has forbidden him from talking to him, he becomes very angry, but controls his temper so as not to frighten his son again. After that, the woman is sitting with her friend and tells her that she met the nurse today and asked her to be there for him, but the nurse seemed tense and scared of something. Her friend tells her that the nurse's behavior is very strange to her, and her sudden disappearance without any preamble was even stranger. The woman then expresses her concern and desire to know what is behind her fear and disappearance. At that time, a businessman named Ibrahim calls the businessman and tells him that they need to talk about the factory land because there is no more time left. His partners are asking about the land every day, and the situation is getting unpleasant. The businessman tells him that he will meet with the board in the coming days, but Ibrahim tells him that he has been saying the same thing for a long time and threatens him that if he does not act quickly, he will deeply regret it. After that, the nurse is sitting with her friend and tells her about her meeting with the woman and their conversation. She says that if she agrees and goes to him, her daughter will be with her to take care of him because it seems like she will agree due to the pressure from him and the woman, besides her husband arguing with her every day about this issue. However, her friend sees this as self-destructive and insists that she must confess her love for him so she does not wrong herself further. She shouldn't just be a person who follows orders, especially since it's very clear that she wishes to be with him, to have him know that her daughter is his, and to live as a happy family together. The nurse is tense at this moment and denies it, but her friend does not believe her. Later, at Mariam's funeral, the businessman, another man, and his brother are present. The brother tells him that he staged Mariam's death to look like a suicide and demands the factory land in exchange for his silence. Otherwise, he threatens to place Mariam's phone, which he possesses, in his house and inform the police, implicating him in Mariam's death. Forensic evidence would reveal she was murdered, and their communications would confirm their relationship, thus incriminating him. Frightened, he feels compelled to agree reluctantly. Then, the businessman asks him to wait by the car. At this moment, it is revealed that the businessman and the other man had conspired against him to easily acquire the factory land. Afterwards, the businessman steps out to him and tells him that he must convince his brother to give up and sell them the factory land. Subsequently, another character calls the businessman and informs him that his brother and the woman have gone to the nurse to persuade her to stay with his brother and take care of him. However, The nurse completely refuses. He is calling now to reassure him that he will continue to pressure her until she agrees, to prevent them from finding someone else for the job, which would cause her to lose it. The businessman then asks him to come to the company and not to tell anyone, especially his wife, that he had called and discussed anything. After ending the call with him, the businessman asks the driver to take him to the nurse's house where they had been before. Meanwhile, the brother is at his mother's grave and is surprised when his brother also arrives. They embrace, and he cries, telling him that before their mother died, she said that if his brother ever woke up, he should tell him that the only thing harder than her death was not seeing his face in her last moments. His brother is deeply moved by this and promises that everything will be restored to how it was before. Their land and the factory will be returned to them, just as his son will return to his embrace. Afterwards, they sit together. The brother tries to convince his brother to sell the factory and the land because they would make a lot of money now. However, his brother refuses, stating that it is impossible for him to allow anyone to take the factory and land, no matter what happens. At that time, the woman notices that her son is very sad, isolating himself in his room because a girl named Elif does not love him as he loves her. He even refuses to eat. The woman calls the businessman and tells him about her son's condition. He tells her that he will come home early to talk with him. When he asks her where she was in the morning, she lies and makes up a story, which annoys him because he is certain she is acting behind his back. Later, the businessman goes to the nurse's home and speaks to her in a threatening tone, telling her to stay away from the place where they all are, to leave and disappear with her family. The nurse is upset by his threat, reminding him that she knows his secret. When the nurse returns to her home, she finds her husband waiting for her. They argue because he interferes in her life and causes her problems. She asks him not to contact the businessman again. He reminds her that they need her job to afford their expenses for their young daughter, besides the loan they don't know how to repay. At night, the businessman talks to his friend about the woman because he feels that she is planning something behind his back and he is worried about her mental state. However, his friend does not answer any questions and assures him that she is not in contact with the woman and that her mental state is fine. At that moment, the businessman gives his friend an envelope containing an invitation to a board meeting to pass on to her mother. He asks her not to tell the woman about the meeting. When his friend returns home, she gives her mother the meeting invitation. When she talks to her father, he mistakenly calls her by another woman's name, which upsets her mother, causing her to leave. His friend then tries to understand from her father who the other woman is, but she cannot make sense of his words. When the husband returns home, he finds the meeting invitation at the front door. He calls his brother to ask about the meeting and its purpose. His brother lies to him, claiming he knows nothing about the meeting. At the same time, the businessman returns home and argues with his wife because he knows she is lying to him. He confronts her about her visit to the nurse. His wife angrily responds that she is free to do as she pleases and is not obligated to inform him about her actions, which greatly angers the businessman. At that time, the nurse goes to the husband's home and tells him that she has accepted his offer and will work for him. The husband is very pleased and informs her that she is free to bring her daughter with her to work at any time. When the nurse leaves the husband's house, his wife, who happens to be at the same place, sees her and goes to thank her while expressing happiness. The next morning, the husband finds several jars of jam in his house. When he opens them and tastes them, he recognizes that they were made by his wife, which greatly disturbs him. He goes to his uncle's house and asks his niece about the jam. She lies to him, claiming she made it, but he does not believe her and leaves. At that time, he sees his son sitting alone, looking sad. He sits with him, and his son talks about a classmate he loves, but is afraid to confess his feelings to. The husband encourages him to have self-confidence and not to be afraid of confrontation. At that time, his wife sees them together and feels joy that her son is sitting with his real father, talking to him. Later, during a board meeting, the businessman finds his wife entering to attend the meeting, wanting to see him lose to his brother as usual. The businessman is annoyed by her comments. Shortly after, his brother arrives and tells Ibrahim that he will not sell and does not agree to the sale. His wife also speaks up at that moment because she is attending on behalf of the uncle, and it is revealed that she too does not agree to the sale. However, the businessman tells them that he has a power of attorney from his wife and his brother to vote on their behalf, and thus the majority has voted in favor of selling the land and the factory. This upsets his brother, but at that moment his wife enters and informs them that she has come to vote herself because she does not agree to sell the factory and the land. This shocks the businessman, and thus his brother wins the vote and the sale of the land and factory is halted. After the meeting, the businessman argues with his wife because of what she did. He is very angry with her. Later, his brother returns to his son, who is with his classmate Elif. He encourages his son to talk to her and get closer to her. His son is very happy happy at that time and feels love toward his father. When the businessman learns what his brother did with his son, he feels that he is starting to get closer to his son. He calls his lawyer to start the proceedings they agreed upon with his wife's power of attorney. When his brother and his friend return home, his brother discovers that the businessman's men are rifling through his house and that the businessman took the house using his wife's power of attorney. This enrages his brother, and he takes his gun and goes to the businessman's company after learning from his men that he is there.